The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested.
Leclerc jumped from his dreamless sleep, drawing in air like a drowning man. The twin suns burned hard on his chest. It felt as though he'd spent the night dead, not just asleep. Squinting, he sat up and scanned his surroundings. All around him were red rocks and coarse sand, and the occasional bushel of dark shrubbery rustled by the torrid wind. The air smelled of oxidized iron and burned copper. There were no signs of civilization. Leclerc was stranded in the desert. To the south was a large rock formation, almost a misshapen mesa, that looked like a trumpeting megaphone. One of its tusks had been broken off since the last time Leclerc had been there, but he recognized it as the aptly named Megaphant Rock. His momentary panic abated. This was familiar territory. Looking down at himself, he realized that all he was wearing were canvas trousers and a pair of trekking sandals. The clothes were not his own and surprisingly clean, almost fresh, not at all the outfit of a man who spent the night out among the sands. Leclerc felt excellent. Considering all he remembered from the night before was a blur of liquor in the Danesville saloon, this was lucky yet disconcerting. Instead of a headache, he had a clear mind. Instead of thirsty, he was well hydrated. And instead of hungry, he was not even feeling the slightest bit peckish. When Leclerc rose to his feet, he realized that no searing pain had ripped through his knee. He'd had that problem for years. What in the rains had happened last night? There was no point wasting time thinking about it now. His tanned skin would save him from an immediate sunburn, but even so he'd have to move to shade fast. More than once had he seen men cooked alive when the twin suns reached their zenith, and he was not interested in joining their ranks. As he trekked toward Megaphant Rock, he reminisced. Oh, what memories had been made in that place. A dozen ambushed caravans, mornings drinking cold milk and eating fresh fruit, days sampling the goods they would be selling to the pleasure house, and evenings of exotic cheeses and expensive wines. The Red Raptor's gang had been great while it had lasted. Leclerc had spent his nights scouting on a rocket horse, driving traders into the ambush at Megaphant Rock. He'd made a name for himself back then. How he would love to have a rocket horse now. There were shapes moving on the face of Megaphant Rock, people standing up high, keeping an eye on the perimeter. Excellent news, really. If they had been waiting to ambush a caravan, they would not have been as obvious, and if they had wanted to keep him away, they would have shot him already. The most likely scenario was that they were traders themselves, looking out to protect the camp they had made for the day. Megaphant Rock was distinctive and easy to find, had an inner courtyard that was well protected from dust storms, and a watering hole in the shallow caves. Ever since Leclerc and the Red Raptors gang had driven out, it had also become very safe. Driven out? Who had been driven out? Yesterday had not just been an ordinary night of drinking, Leclerc remembered. It had been a full gathering of the Silver Tree Council. That's why he had been in Danesville, not Dust's Edge, where he ran the underground warehouses. There had been a dispute between two factions of the council, one led by Frank Bauman and the other by Leclerc. Leclerc's side had won. Then had come the celebration, and then had come the pang of rifles and the smell of plasma. The others, Bauman, had sent mercenaries after them, but how had Leclerc ended up out here, a week's walk away from Danesville? "Halt!" a voice commanded. He was 100 paces away from Megaphant Rock, and it seemed the traders were finally ready to acknowledge his existence. A broad-shouldered, middle-aged man emerged from the entrance to the formation's sheltered interior and marched toward him, one hand raised and the other on the butt of his rifle. Leclerc stopped, not wanting to alarm the man. As the guard came closer, it became clear how exceptional he was. He was clad in bronze metalloplast armor, not just partially, but from the tactical display hovering in front of his left eye to his heavy combat boots. On his hip was a collapsible antimatter rifle, probably capable of switching from sniper to shotgun mode and anything in between in a matter of seconds. There was a pistol of similar make strapped to his leg and a grenade belt slung across his chest. It took Leclerc a moment to realize that a camellia cloak cape was billowing in the wind behind him, changing colors at a speed that Leclerc had not even thought possible. Whoever these people were, they were not scared of bandits. Gear like this only came from off-world, and if someone was wearing it head to toe, chances were high that they themselves were from off-world too. Leclerc was beginning to think that coming here may not have been such a good idea. "What is your name, stranger?" the off-worlder asked, his accent too refined for his brutish appearance. "Leclerc. Jake Leclerc. I'm in a bit of a problematic situation, as you can see," Leclerc responded. The off-worlder nodded. "I am aware. How did you get into this problematic situation?" "In all honesty, I don't remember. I was out drinking last night and had a couple too many." "So it would seem." The off-worlder sub-vocalized into a laryngeal microphone, then waited for a response. After a moment, he nodded, then gestured for Leclerc to follow him. "Today is your lucky day, Mr. Leclerc. Madame Ding has decided to assist you." Entering the shade was a relief for his skin, which no longer felt like it was being cooked. The smooth, wavy grain of the canyon walls made him feel like he had arrived home, and the slight echo of his footsteps reminded him of simpler times. The guard who had greeted him was not the only off-world mercenary equipped with gear that Leclerc would have, and had, killed for. He spotted at least a dozen more men, and a few women, all sporting armor identical to the guards. They were climbing the rock face toward elevated positions, reclining in the shade, and setting up equipment. They threw him curious glances, some even frowned. It otherwise seemed that whatever he was doing here, it was none of their business. These people were working for someone, and that person often gave unusual orders, that much was clear. In the courtyard of Megaphant Rock, a sandcrawler larger than most buildings Leclerc had been inside was parked next to a squat, grey personnel tank that presumably housed Madame Ding's security entourage. Her own rolling palace was stylish in a way only off-world things could afford to be, white and streamlined with large laminated windows. Madame Ding carried herself with the grace of an empress. She was beautiful in the way only a woman of wealth and power could be, with smooth, cinnamon skin and amber eyes speckled with bright yellow flecks. She wore the traditional layered garb of the Dustwalker people that sometimes found their way up north from their usual routes, except hers was much cleaner, colorful, and made of fabric so expensive that no Dustwalker would ever have been able to afford them. "Thank you, Commander Bride," she said to the man who had brought Leclerc in. She spoke with the same refined accent he did, and nothing like the Dustwalkers. It was as though what she was wearing was a costume. "I'll be here if you need me, madame," Commander Bride responded and marched off. "Mr. Leclerc, I must say you are an unexpected visitor. Surviving the desert in nothing but trousers is an impressive skill," the woman said. "It's my specialty. I've worked in the desert all my life. I'm a survivalist. If you take me along, I can work for you. I know all the secrets, all the safe places, and all the dangers of this area." He also knew that, though not easy, looting a caravan like this would make him rich beyond imagining. "I would appreciate some clothes, though, if you can spare them. I promise I will earn them out." "Well, I'm glad to see you don't believe I took you in out of the kindness of my heart. You will work for me, and you will work hard." Madame Ding looked him up and down. "Though I'm afraid I can't get you any clothes right now. Those would only hinder you in your work." Leclerc gave her a roguish grin, understanding. This was getting better by the minute. His almost preternatural charm had been one of the driving forces behind his career, and Madame Ding was making it easy for him. In a few days she would be so addicted to his attention that he would be able to make her do anything he wanted. "I'm happy to be of service, Madame Ding." "Oh, please do call me Tatiana. And now come, I'm feeling very womanly." Heaven was a real place, and Leclerc had entered it. Tatiana's sandcrawler had 3 decks, though with how open and interconnected they were, it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. It was an exercise in understated luxury. Plasterwood floors molded themselves to the shape of his feet as he moved over them. Art was on display that he didn't understand beyond the fact that it was expensive, and an android butler waited to serve up every amenity Leclerc could dream of. The vehicle had full atmospheric and temperature control of its interior, and any type of environment could be replicated down to the sound and vista through the windows. Leclerc had never been in a landscape of ice before, though he knew that they existed very far to the north for short periods of the year. After their first session, Tatiana had shown him what it looked like, along with some places so alien he could scarcely take them all in. Gardens of tubular plants in bright shades of red springing from violet soil overgrown with pulsating lattices. Birds the size of megaphones gliding across the starry night sky, illuminated by strange lights dancing eerily above. A forest of fleshy trees connected by thick strands of red liquid. After only a few minutes, Tatiana had decided to make use of him again, though to Leclerc it did not feel like work. The woman knew things and did things that no other woman had ever done to him before, and Leclerc had sampled a lot of women. Best of all, he never got tired. The butler simply gave him a sweet drink of water, and he was ready to go at it again. "You're starfolk, aren't you?" Leclerc asked after having left the bed for the 3rd time today. "Isn't all folk starfolk, really?" Tatiana responded. Leclerc did not understand what she meant by that, but did not want to look stupid. "What are you doing here?" "I'm waiting for a friend of mine. He got caught up, but he should be here tonight." "I mean, what are you doing on this world?" Leclerc specified. "Leisure." Tatiana reclined in an armchair that perfectly fit her contour. "I'm a big game hunter of sorts." "Well, there's not a lot of big game to be had around these parts, I'll tell you that much," said Leclerc. "There's dune skitters south of here in the dust, and the bristled savanna up north has a lot of megaphones passing through it at this time of year." "Trust me, Jake, I am exactly where I want to be." Tatiana slapped his butt. "Now do speak to the butler. I want you in a tailored suit when my friend arrives for dinner." Suits had never been very comfortable. They were delicate, clunky pieces of attire that one wore to events one did not to attend for reasons one did not entirely understand. What did a fallen brother-in-arms have to gain if Leclerc kept scratching his neck at his funeral? This was different. The suit the android butler had manufactured for him was made of some sort of artificial silk, keeping him cool in the heat. The chalk-white dress shirt scratched even less than his most worn-out and beloved tops. He might as well have been naked for all the difference it made. The black jacket was not heavy, constraining or too padded on the shoulders, but just as well fitted as the shirt. If Leclerc walked into town like this, he'd be gutted in a street corner in a matter of seconds. Tatiana's friend arrived just after sunset in a sandcrawler very similar to her own, complete with its own security detail. He was tall and lanky, with piercing green eyes and an aquiline nose. His black hair was combed back with pomade, and both his hands were heavy with rings so valuable that each could buy a mansion. Like Leclerc, he was wearing a suit, only his was midnight blue and his shirt was black as coal. "Jake Leclerc, meet my friend Errol Fox." Tatiana was wearing a slim but not skin-tight cream-colored dress that, through some kind of starfolk technology, rippled as though its surface were liquid with every movement. Leclerc extended his hand and gave Fox a cocky grin. "Pleasure to meet you." Mr. Fox shook Leclerc's hand. "The pleasure is all mine," he said, but the resentment in his eyes told a different story. He threw Tatiana an annoyed glance, and she replied with a grin of her own. So Fox was here because he was into Tatiana, which she was clearly aware of. To make her lack of interest abundantly clear, she had brought Leclerc into the picture. If this morning someone had told him that, by the end of the night, he would stand higher in the pecking order than a starfolk man, he would have laughed at them. But here he was, the lover of a woman who could have also had a man with nigh infinite means. Dinner was served on the terrace extending from the Sandcrawler's highest deck. Megaphant rock was radiating heat onto it, and they had a view of the vast desert ahead through a large gap in the stone. A gentle breeze and the chirping of crickets filled the air. Tatiana sat in the middle, while Fox and Leclerc took seats perpendicular to her, and opposite to each other. As an appetizer, the butler served little green balls of what looked like dough, but tasted sweet and sour at the same time. They came with a smoky caramel sauce that Leclerc enjoyed immensely. "I see you've already gotten your spoils," Mr. Fox commented, pointing at Leclerc with his fork. "As I do every time, Errol, and you complain, as you do every time," the woman responded. "I'm just pointing out that he might be dangerous. Insurance doesn't help when you're dead. I should know. I sell it." Leclerc gave Fox another sardonic grin. The man had looked right through him, but Tatiana, taken as she was with her strapping outlaw, had not. "Well, what can I say? I like dangerous men," she said, giving Leclerc a wink. Being starfolk, most of her wealth was forever outside of his reach, but that didn't mean he could not devise a way to take everything she had brought down to the planet with her. "Mr. Leclerc, if I may, what is it you do for a living?" Fox asked. "Oh, a bit of this and a bit of that," Leclerc responded, pretending like his accumulated wealth compared to whatever Fox considered pocket change. "I'm a man of many talents, as one needs to be to survive out here. Tatiana hired me for a few of them." He winked. "It must be exciting to be a jack of all trades," Tatiana said. "Me, I would be happy to get a little respite from mining stars for their base elements, but that is what I am best at." Fox raised an eyebrow. "How much is she paying you exactly?" "Shelter and passage, that's all I need. Also everything he could loot off her and her guards once he had found an appropriate trap and gotten his band back together." "So we are going to Danesville?" Fox asked Tatiana. "I figured as much when you asked me to meet you here. Do we really have to?" This gave Leclerc pause. How did Fox know he had come from Danesville? How did he know he wanted to get back there when the smoke had cleared? How did Starfolk even know the name of an outlaw town in the middle of the desert at all? "Of course we're going to Danesville. I go to Danesville every time I'm here, and I always enjoy it immensely," Tatiana responded. This, too, was weird. Leclerc had never heard of any starfolk that visited Danesville, but then she did have a penchant for costumes, so maybe she had come disguised as a dustwalker. The android butler served the next course, a blue steak with the consistency of beef, but skimmed like chicken. It tasted like pickled cabbage, the meat juice having an onion-like note. Though he had never tasted anything like it, Leclerc pretended like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Danesville is played out, boring, and full of moralists," Fox said. "I realize the excitement it may have once generated, but that was so long ago I can scarcely remember it." "Danesville is a timeless classic, Errol. You just can't appreciate the subtleties of it." Tatiana turned to Leclerc. "Jake, being a local, you probably know all about Danesville, don't you?" "Oh yes, I've been there from time to time. Comes with the territory, quite literally. Very dangerous place, full of unsavory folk. It was best that he not give them too much of a reason to suspect his involvement with any form of banditry. As far as Tatiana was concerned, he was just an honest guide who'd had a little too much to drink. Identifying himself as a gangster would destroy the allure that attracted her to him. "So you wouldn't recommend it?" asked Mr. Fox. "Well, if you're up for seeing the sights, it's definitely something you have to work your way up towards. If you want my advice, I recommend visiting a few other settlements first, to test if you can withstand the danger." It would also give Leclerc time to learn more about Tatiana and her security detail, and make contact with some people who might help him set up an ambush worthy of her defenses. Barry Hobbs over in Salt Pit would probably be able to get some high-end weapons on a loan, and Mr. Buttercup up in Elmrot could mobilize a small army of men capable of using them. "I've seen all of them. None are as exciting as Danesville," Tatiana said, squashing Leclerc's plans. We'll also have to move fast. Things are getting hot over there, from what I hear. So news of what happened had already travelled to her. Leclerc decided to try and glean some information from her later. At this point, he did not consider it unreasonable to assume that she knew more about the current state of Danesville than he did. After dinner was over, Mr. Fox returned to his own sandcrawler, and the vehicles turned into motion. They were crossing the desert at a rapid pace, and Tatiana had demanded Leclerc take her on the dinner table. A hydraulic system compensated for the rough terrain so perfectly that the terrace was even at all times as Tatiana screamed into the night. Afterwards, Leclerc had remained outside, watching the desert pass him by. The android butler had been very forthcoming at his request for a glass of moonshine, though this stuff was not nearly as strong as anything he was used to. Something was definitely off about this whole situation. As long as he was with Tatiana and her security detail, he would not be harmed in Danesville. If the Bowman faction had truly driven out his own last night, then they would surely be looking for him. But even if they pointed him out on the street, what was the worst that could happen? He had become the companion to a Starfolk woman, and she clearly relished his identity as a rogue. Who was Tatiana to concern herself with the schemes of Frank Bowman? But then who was she to concern herself with the schemes of Jake Leclerc? He was planning this grand caper for which he would need a lot of support and a lot of manpower, but did not even know the state of his network. On any other caravan, he would have tried to use their communicators to call up some trusted individuals, then covered his tracks. But risking such a thing on a Starfolk sandcrawler was much too risky. He was able to fool them in the wilds of the desert, but technology was the one thing he could not hope to ever beat them at. "I hope you're not getting soft on me, Jake." Tatiana was standing in the doorway to the terrace, wearing nothing but a white sheet draped over her shoulders. "I'm too excited to fall asleep, and I want you to help me with that." Danesville was both the same as always and completely different at the same time. Located by a geyser spring in one of the greener patches of the desert, it seemed many of the brick and wood buildings had taken fire in the battle. Many of the town's characteristic blue-painted walls had plasma scorches and bullet holes in them. The silver tree in the town center had been on fire at some point, as evidenced by burnt and fallen branches. Brannigan's fort was the only structure that had been completely destroyed, and Leclerc was unsurprised by this. The building had contained all the secrets, garrison, storage, and administration of the Silvertree Council, and the Bowman faction had wanted access to it. It appeared Leclerc's comrades had been valiant in their defense, so much so that Bowman saw no other option but to raise the place instead of taking it as a prize. "Do you want to see something?" Tatiana asked. She wore a wide dress and corsage, flaunting delicate lacework and vibrant colors, as the wealthier ladies of Danesville enjoyed. Much like her Dustwalker attire, it was too clean, too perfect, and too stylized to seem real. She'd forced Leclerc into a similarly ridiculous outfit, black jeans and a jacket with silver trims, as well as a wide-brimmed hat and pointed boots with small stars on metal sticks at the heel. Leclerc had never seen such strange footwear before, but then Starfolk did have a weakness for vanity. "I don't think there's anything about you I haven't seen," Leclerc responded, and gave Tatiana a wink. She grinned and raised an eyebrow. "You are a dirty man with dirty thoughts, Jake. But that's not what I mean." Tatiana handed him a pair of black binoculars. "Have a look around." "I have very good eyes," Leclerc insisted. "Not this good." Tatiana shook her head. Leclerc looked through the binoculars and could not believe what he saw. Behind the green tinge of the lenses, he found that Danesville was surrounded by dozens of luxury sandcrawlers just like Tatiana's. When he took away the binoculars, it was as though they weren't there, but when he put them back on, they were in the exact same spots. "They're cloaked so as to not break the immersion," Tatiana explained. "If you get within 10 meters of one, you'll be able to see it. We wouldn't want people bumping into these things, after all." There were rumors of Starfolk having technology that could make things invisible, truly invisible, much better than Chameleon Cloak. Leclerc had never believed them. It was crazy talk. Spacer yarn spun to make the starfolk out to be more godlike than they actually were. Everything that existed could also be seen. That was a simple fact of life. Or at least it had been, until now. Leclerc felt his knees getting weak momentarily. It was confusing. He had not felt like this in many years. "What in the reins is going on here?" he asked, looking at Tatiana, who had an amused expression on her face. "Are you in league with Bauman?" "Bauman?" She gave a snorting laugh. "Ah, Bauman, what an unsavory character he was. No, Bauman is dead. It's all about you this time." For some reason, Tatiana sounded nostalgic. "But you know Bauman. Why does the Starfolk know Bauman?" Leclerc was holding on to the terrace railings. "Did you loan him the money to get those mercenaries? Some of them look like they were from off-world." "Oh, my sweet Jake, this will be such fun." She moved into the sandcrawler, beckoning for him to follow. "Come, let's go into town. You'll see that it all makes sense there." Inside Danesville, Leclerc was shocked to find that Tatiana and her fake attire were anything but out of place. Half the people here looked like they were only pretending to be from this world, and that could only be because they were starfolk playing dress-up. Even their bodyguards, often just one or two, but still easily detectable, wore costumes. How had he never heard of something like this happening before? The Danesville natives, some of whom he recognized by face, but all of which were discernible by their authenticity, mostly treated the parade of strangers strolling through town with the same suspicion he did. Surely this was unprecedented, most likely on the entire planet, because otherwise he would at least have heard rumors of it. Tatiana had joined up with Mr. Fox, who was wearing a bejeweled grey suit that was making the least effort possible to fit in. His two bodyguards were dressed in uniforms, like the one Leclerc's grandfather, who had fought in the Third Water War, had worn to special events. Tatiana herself was accompanied by two of her security detail, both dressed like third-rate bandits. Commander Bride was nowhere to be seen. "Oh look, it's Faisal Totak," Tatiana said, pointing at a dark-skinned man in a sky-blue travel coat. "Please don't draw his attention. I haven't seen him in 20 years, and those have not been enough to recover from his drivelling," Mr. Fox said. "Errol, the quality of his starships is why people buy insurance for when they break down. You should be happy for all the business he brings in," Tatiana scolded. "His rust buckets break down, I get to pay out policies, so no, his business is not appreciated." Fox spat on the ground. They entered the town square, what remained of the silver tree at its center. The businesses around were in a much better state of repair than Leclerc had expected, almost as though they had been fixed back up as soon as the fighting was done. Tatiana led him over to the Deep Vault Bank, which, as always, advertised unmatched rates, perfect discretion, and planetary services underneath its cast iron sign. It was protected by the Silvertree Council, and was also where Leclerc and many other bandits had stored part of their fortune as a torrid day fund. "Go talk to Faisal, Errol. I don't think you'll like the bank very much," Tatiana said to Mr. Fox. "I'd rather shoot myself in the head." He tapped one of his guards on the shoulder. "I think I'll go to the casino instead, if you don't mind." "Suit yourself," Tatiana said. "Mr. Leclerc, I'll see you again soon enough," Mr. Fox said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Leclerc shook it. "I sure do hope so." A grin on her face, Tatiana took Leclerc by the wrist and dragged him into the bank. Inside, old Cato's fat, pale face was behind the counter. His ever-present frown deepened when they came in. "Leclerc, where the rain have you been?" He snorted a spoonful of tobacco. "I haven't seen you in town for a long time." "What do you mean? I deposited some cash here last week," Leclerc insisted. "You most certainly did not." Old Cato shook his head. "I told you this would all make sense soon, Jake. Don't worry about it." Tatiana put a hand calmingly on his chest. Now I would very much like to get into vault number 6, she said to old Cato. Yes, you should, he responded, sounding a little surprised. He unlocked the heavy metal grate in front of the stairway that would lead them underground. You two stay here. Make sure we don't get any visitors, Tatiana said to her guards. Please, follow me. Old Cato jangled his keys. The Deep Vault Bank had its name for a reason. It occupied most of the dense but extensive cave system underneath Danesville, sealed off from the parts of it that were underneath Brannigan's fort or private households. The dark orange rock smelled of dirt and blood and was sparsely illuminated in the white light of LED glow spheres covered in dust. Heavy doors of wood framed in steel and covered with rock tiles were set into the walls of the labyrinthine tunnels at irregular intervals, and old Cato opened the occasional steel grate with a thumbprint. The vaults were not marked or in chronological order, and only old Cato knew the location of each individual vault, making it more difficult for potential thieves to target a specific one. Of course, that would require them to get into the tunnels in the first place, which even in the town that played home to one of the great bandit associations, nobody had ever accomplished. Vault number 6 was down half a dozen stairways and 20 twists and turns. Old Cato used a faded keycard to unlock the first stage of the door, then let Tatiana forward to do the rest. She lowered her eye to a hidden retinal scanner, and the door unlocked with a click. I didn't know you had access to this kind of security, the clerk said to old Cato. You don't pay enough to get one of the good vaults, the banker responded. I will leave you to it now, he said to Tatiana and turned around. If you want back out, just shout for me. Thank you, Tatiana said and waited for old Cato to have walked around the corner. So, Jake, are you ready for some answers? The clerk did not know what to say. I guess so. Smiling, Tatiana pushed open the heavy vault door like it was made of foam and stepped inside, beckoning Leclerc to follow. It was not what he had expected, though he was not sure what that had been in the first place. What he found were pictures, racks upon racks of pictures, framed in metal and arranged in columns. Most of them were of the desert, many of Danesville, but he also found some from the dust and the bristle savannah and places he had never seen before. There was one series of pictures shot in an area that was covered in snow. At the bottom were mostly landscape shots, vast plains of ice framed by black mountains. Above that were pictures of a man standing atop what looked to be a type of sand crawler, only adapted for ice, and definitely not of the luxurious kind the starfolk had access to. He had a stern face with narrow eyes and an ugly scar across his nose. White crystals hung in his wispy beard. There were pictures of him with other men and women, sitting around a fire outside a cave. One where he stood on a rocky precipice, aiming at something with a sniper rifle. One where he was in a stuffy ballroom, dancing with a woman. It took Leclerc a moment to recognize her as Tatiana. The picture at the very top was of that same man, sitting in a chair, dark blood flowing from his throat to the white snow on the ground. Tatiana was standing behind him, a razor in her hand, smiling. Quoram Eskel, the Ice Wraith, number 3, was emblazoned in the frame above the picture. All the other series were the same. Landscape shots at the bottom, pictures of men and women above that, and finally them being killed by Tatiana. Bloody Colin Fint, number 5. Casimir Jones, the Laughing Reaper, number 1. Leonore Pirdal, the Witch of the Wandering Dune, number 2. Leclerc had never heard of most of these people until he saw a name that made his blood freeze. Frank Bauman, the Plasma Kingmaker, number 8. Red Yvette Noble, number 1. Malcolm Manhunter, number 5. Some of these people are legends. They've been dead for decades, if not centuries, said Leclerc. Then he spotted something that sent another shiver down his spine. There was a second series for Quoram Eskel, the Ice Wraith, only this one was marked number 2 instead of number 3. He was still dead in the top picture, but instead of having had his throat cut, he was hanging from the neck by a chandelier, Tatiana posing next to his dead body.
"What in all rains is this?"
Leclerc asked. He could barely speak. It felt as though his breath was wheezing out of his lungs, unwilling to form words. "I think you will find this one particularly interesting," said Tatiana, who had closed the door behind them. Leclerc had not even noticed. He walked over to the rack she was pointing at, only to find that it was about another person he knew very well. Himself. The series focused mainly on Danesville, and it ended in him laying face down in the street, bullet holes in his back, and Tatiana standing next to his corpse, hunting rifle in hand. "Jake Leclerc, Ghost of Megaphant Rock, number 9, it said. Leclerc stepped back, bumping into another rack of pictures. He spun around, feeling his throat tighten as fear grabbed a hold of him. This one was him too, only number 3, where Tatiana had beheaded him with a sword out in the desert. "What is this?" he repeated. The world around him began to spin. "This is the 3rd time I killed you, Jake, and that over there was the 9th. Today is going to be the 13th, Tatiana said, taking a slow step toward him, a smile on her face. Leclerc retreated instinctively, running backward down the aisle, stopping when he bumped into another rack of pictures. He could not turn around to look at them. His eyes were fixed on Tatiana, who was patiently moving toward him. "Do you know how difficult it is to create a living, breathing world with rich, realistic lore?" she asked. Leclerc had no idea what she was talking about. "It's impossible. Too much work and brain power required for a single person, too difficult to organize for a team, and too creative for a machine. So what does one do?" She tapped on one of the picture frames with a fingernail. "One lets the lore write itself." A mischievous grin on her face, Tatiana began to take off her fancy dress, still pacing slowly as she walked toward Leclerc. 6 centuries of history have been recorded in this system. Every world, every continent, every territory, every town. From the beginning of your life to its premature end at the hands of Frank Bauman's mercenaries, your brain was recorded, as were the brains of everyone you have ever heard about or known. She dropped the dress on the ground, now wearing nothing but the underlying corsage. Do you know how much material a team of creative geniuses can get out of that? A whole star system, every planet inhabited, everything recorded. They sometimes nudged history in a more interesting direction, but then they also switch up the details every season. "Why are you doing this?" Leclerc asked, trying and failing to move back further. He had never felt this kind of fear before. "Because you are special, Jake. You are the one that got away, the one I killed 12 times but still did not get everything out of." She opened the corsage, dropping it like a shell. "Every single person in this room I was able to seduce, some of them multiple times, but not you. You always got the drop on me, or were otherwise unreachable, and that is what makes you so intriguing." Tatiana stopped when she was standing right in front of him. She was naked and terrifying. "I was tired of failing to get you, so I called up a few friends on the creative team, and they agreed to deploy you late into the season at a spot where I would be able to find you. After all, my company sold them most of the mass they needed to build their planets." She knelt down to his level, biting her lip. "And I have to say, the wait has been worth it." Tatiana's breath was hot on Leclerc's face as she leaned over him, pressing her body against his. "And now, I will have you one last time, and experience the ecstasy of taking your life, knowing that your character will never be deployed again." Leclerc tried to yank himself free, but felt cold metal on his temple. There must have been a gun behind him all this time, and Tatiana had just taken it. The column of pictures moved away behind him, and strong hands grabbed Leclerc, raising him to his feet, arms locking around his chest. He could not see them, only feel them. They were invisible. Tatiana grabbed a syringe with a clear liquid in it, and Leclerc knew instinctively that it was the same sweet water that the android butler had always offered when Tatiana wanted him. She buried it in his arm and the effects were immediate. Tatiana grinned, placing the gun back on his temple. Oh, how I love doing this. When the final echoes of Madame Ding's screams had faded, the man holding up Jake Leclerc's lifeless body stopped being invisible. He was clad in bronze body armor. It was dirty where some of Leclerc's upper skull had spread, but not nearly as covered as Madame Ding's naked body. She seemed to relish it. Thank you, Commander Bride, if you would be so kind as to take my victory picture. No clothes? Commander Bride asked. Madame Ding raised an eyebrow. What, are we going to pretend like we're civilized now? Just take the picture. Errol is probably bored to death in that dreadful casino.
If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.